estamos adiantados, temos mais 2 minutos até começar a aula, tá? Eu vou dar alguns recados, vou repetir daqui a pouco, tá? Pessoal, um dos primeiros avisos que foi enviado a vocês foi sobre o e-mail da disciplina. E o professor Ron falou na aula passada. Vocês lembram desse e-mail? O primeiro e-mail é o quê? É o PRPPG 7000 dúvidas@gmail.com. E o outro e-mail é transversal@ufpr.br. Eu tenho recebido e-mails sobre a disciplina no meu e-mail pessoal. Então, eu peço a gentileza de vocês usarem somente esses 2 e-mails para falar sobre a disciplina. Nós temos aqui uma equipe de monitores, nós temos o professor, tá? E nós temos os e-mails para essa disciplina. Então, o professor Ron está fazendo várias outras coisas, e aí recebe um e-mail da disciplina, né? Então, eu peço que, por favor, respeitem esse espaço que a gente tem e esse e-mail que a gente criou para essa finalidade, tá? A outra coisa é sobre o prazo de entrega das lições de casa, tá? Então, isso não foi deixado claro, mas agora a gente vai deixar bem claro. A gente vai passar nos avisos, vai colocar no Moodle. A lição de casa tem data de entrega, tá? E a data de entrega é terça-feira, 23h59. Tá bom? Então, a tarefa começa, por exemplo, a tarefa da aula 3 começa hoje, certo? E vai até terça-feira da semana que vem, tá? 23h59.
Yeah, so that module 3, I open today at the end of the class.
Tá.
Because if I open it before, people already start doing it.
Okay.
End of module 3, and then it'll close at 23:59 on Tuesday next week. Yeah,
Okay.
we're starting that this week because I wanted to give the first 2 weeks people time to get used to all of the stuff.
Ok, tá? Então, vamos lá. O professor vai abrir a lição de casa 3 no site Go Formative, tá? Após a aula daqui, tá? E vai valer até terça-feira, 23h59. As 2 primeiras semanas ele deixou mais tempo para a gente se acostumar com a dinâmica das aulas, tá bom? Para o pessoal que ainda está chegando, tá? O primeiro aviso foi sobre os e-mails. Usem os e-mails que a gente repassou no aviso, que é PRPPG 7000 dúvidas@gmail.com ou transversal@ufpr.br. Sobre a lição de casa, fiquem atentos para a hora de entrega, que é terça-feira da próxima semana, 23h59. Tá bom? Sabendo disso, pessoal, vamos começar a aula, tá bom? Muito obrigada. Thanks, Professor Ron. Tudo certo com o remoto? Tudo certo com o remoto? Então, vamos lá.
Hello, everybody. I was just telling the teacher assistants here that I was just thinking, all these people here are wearing their T-shirts and short sleeve shirts. I see a guy with a Grêmio T-shirt there. Yeah. Last week, everybody was wearing scarf and hat and 12 jackets on. I just can't believe it's like 1 week. Curitiba is just amazing. It really is. Never know what to wear. Okay, so a couple of things I want to say before we start. First of all, last week, some people told me that they were having some difficulty talking about the remote class following because there was some discrepancy in the timing. So in other words, I would be saying something, and then the people watching in the remote version of the class would be seeing a slide that didn't match what I was saying. And so I think we fixed that this week. Hopefully that will be better now. The other thing is that last week we tried doing, if you remember, the Kahoot exercise where you had to put in your name and all that. I think what happened was that because we have something like at least 500 people accessing at the same time, the system just exploded. And so we're not going to do that this time, and we'll have to, if we do something similar, I'll have to think out a different system. So I apologize for those of you who tried to access and weren't able to. All right, starting today, we're going to be talking about how to plan for your writing, and one of probably the main message for today is that writing isn't just about the physical activity of typing. It's much more than that. And that what is much more than that is actually important. And so that's what we're talking about today as we lead up to talking about the introduction section, which is coming up in a couple of weeks. So today, before we start talking about that, we'll quickly go over your grammar homework, a little bit about what you thought about the corpus exercise, and we'll have also a brief commentary on what does it mean to have correct grammar to begin with. And this is something that is evolving and changing in the publishing world of English. And then talk about these factors that are important when you're planning your article. Before I talk about any of that, though, somebody asked a question on the first day about whether they should publish in English, or rather they should write the assignments in English. And this week, I thought of another reason why you might want to think about trying to practice your English more. And it has to do with international collaboration. Some of you may know that last week, a company called Clarivate Analytics published a research report about scientific production in Brazil. And this Web of Science group. And this was prepared for CAPES. And basically, they wanted to ask the question of, okay, how does Brazilian research perform in Brazil and also compared to other countries? And when they looked at the papers that have been produced in Brazil over the last, I think, 2013 to 2018, and when they compared to other countries, actually Brazil compares quite well. Brazil's production has been constant. It's been pretty good. So you see that it's behind India, Brazilian, in terms of the output, quantity, how many articles are put out there. It's a little bit behind South Korea as well, but it's ahead of Russia, ahead of South Africa, and it's been consistently strong over the past, that 6-year period, 2013 to 2018. So that's good news. However, this agency, Clarivate Analytics, also looked at what is called normalized citation impact. So they looked at how many times or how much is this impact, these articles being cited? How often are they being cited? What is the impact of these articles? And what they saw was that there was growth, but then something happened. There was a drop in 2017. So there was a growth up until 2016, and then something happened in 2017. They don't know exactly what. It looked like this. So when you compare Brazil to the other countries in terms of citation impact, you see that Brazil began to grow, they grew, and they were catching up a little bit to the world average of impact, and then they fell. One of the possible explanations for that fall, that reduction in impact, was that there was also a reduction in the number of co-authors from other countries with which Brazilian scholars wrote. So there is some research that points to a higher impact occurring when scholarship occurs or when authorship occurs with international partners. And so here you see a summary of that. One potential explanation for the decrease in CNCI, this is the citation impact, is the reduced growth in the number of papers with one or more international co-authors. It is widely recognized that international collaborations enhance the citation impact of an article. In the 3 years, 2013 to 2015, the percentage of papers with an international co-author increased by 17.5% and had a positive effect. But in the most recent 3 years, 2016, 2018, there has only been a 1.8% growth. And they speculate that this might have to do with also a drop in co-authors. So this points to a couple of things. First of all, that if you are going to think about, if you're trying to increase the impact of your papers, it's good to think about doing this in co-authorship with people from other institutions. It doesn't have to be from any particular country. Just the fact that you have international co-authors can impact positively the impact of your article. So creating those networks or taking advantage of networks is something should be a goal for a lot of researchers here in Brazil if they want to positively affect the impact of their scholarship. Another possible effect, though, here you see research that confirms what I just talked about, is that now, as you may know, opportunities to build those kinds of international partnerships have been reduced as well. So there isn't as much money as there was in the old days, 2008 to 2013 and so on, to send people abroad. So you may have to think about, together with your advisors, strategies to try to build and strengthen those international partnerships that don't involve necessarily traveling to places as much as. So this is something that unfortunately we may see this impact get stronger, this negative impact grow stronger in the coming years. But it's a challenge. Now, as you're writing in English, so this is another reason why writing in English is important, because if you're writing with international scholars who don't speak Portuguese, obviously you'd be writing probably in a lingua franca, which is probably English. We are here to help. And so if you ever have any questions about any time that you're writing something and you're not sure if you're on the right track, you have this available on our website. Quickly turning now to the grammar homework. Just to quickly go over some of the answers, this analysis of variance. If you checked, this was the correct one, not variance analysis. And somebody asked me before the class, well, what's the rule? There is no hard and fast rule. I can't say to you that this is the correct or the incorrect way to do it. There's no perfect rule so that you can learn this and memorize it and what is the correct way for these constructions. But the most important thing is that you're aware. So when you write a combination that is a noun plus noun combination in your research, and you do that a lot because you have to include a lot of technical vocabulary in your research writing, that you're aware, well, before I submit this or before I send this to the journal, I better check that this is the correct combination. So it's being aware that this this construction that we saw last week can be tricky. And so now you have strategies to check that. So you can check with Google Translate, for example, and you can see that análise de variância is translated that way. That's one confirmation. You can also check, with Google Scholar and see the number of hits that you get, how many occurrences that you have, and if you compare 1.9 million, nearly 2 million results compared to variance analysis, then you see which only has 169,000. That should be a red flag. Okay, so one of these is much more common. That doesn't necessarily mean that's the right answer, but it's a good evidence that it is probably you can have more confidence that is the right one. And finally, you can check against the corpus of your own research now and see, okay, yeah, this is the term that's used when talking about ANOVAs in my area, so that's correct. You have one hit in this corpus here of variance analysis versus analysis of variance. Same thing with confidence interval, and that you have analysis of variance, but then you don't have interval of confidence. When you compare the two, 2.2 million versus 5,750, you can see there's a big difference. Again, you can check against your corpus, and you see that there are some examples there, 17 hits in my corpus of food science, and then 0 of interval of confidence. So then you have good evidence that probably confidence interval is the correct term. Same thing with the other answers, the other problems that you have here. Storage time. This one's a bit trickier because you can see more examples of storage time and time of storage on Google. But you see that Google translates it this way. Deep L also translates it this way, so you have two pieces of evidence. They also, Deep L, slightly different from Google Scholar, also shows you other alternatives, so you can check, okay, maybe it's shelf life, maybe it's storage life. It takes some detective work to determine that. But then if you compare storage time anyway and time of storage, you see that storage time is the more common one. Therefore, you have evidence that that might be the best term to use. Again, it's a matter of doing some detective work a lot of times. The other construction that we talked about, using adverbs in the right place, this was the best one. And a lot of people get confused about adverbs because a lot of people don't know what adverb is. And adverbs are kind of not as clear as what a noun is or an adjective. And so let's take a basic Portuguese construction. Eu tomo café, which is a fact, I do. And the translation, I drink coffee. Okay. If you have the word sempre, so always, in Portuguese, you can say that this can go in different places. That's an adverb. Now, just so in case you don't remember what an adverb is, that's the definition of it. Modifies a verb, and it says here that modifica o substantivo invariável, so it doesn't change. Oh yeah, and raramente modifica substantivo. But in Portuguese, it is actually possible. So you can hear people say, eu sempre tomo café, but I also hear people say, eu tomo sempre café, which sounds very strange to me, but actually it's possible. It's a possible construction in Portuguese. Ou eu tomo café sempre. In English, however, it can't go there. It has to go before the verb. I always drink coffee. Or depending, you can say, I drink coffee always, but that's kind of taking liberty. You would never say, or it sounds very strange to say, I drink always coffee. It sounds like you're talking like Yoda. So be careful with that one. Foi importante, cuidadoso. Now that you have awareness, if you're aware that this construction is a big problem, you can then check it, say, okay, that's what Google Translate says. It was important to carefully move the object, so there's modifying the verb, or after the object. So important, move the object carefully. That's okay. But definitely not move carefully the object. Can't go there right before the object or after the verb. Then it sounds strange. So that's why you have this, partially affected the data as the correct version. You can also check against your corpus and find the similar thing. I also talked about skell as being an option. So you can check to see there that it always occurs right before the verb. Again, you can be a grammar detective on your own now. Same thing here. Formalizados dados sociodemográficos not were analyzed, but sociodemographic data were analyzed. Same thing with that one. The passive construction at the end. And here, the preposition issue, you can more easily check with your own corpus. And you see that based, if you do a run of concordance, you see that based is usually on or upon. If you're confused about which one's better, most common between on or upon, you can run a concordance and see that on is the most common one. And also upon occurs common too, but the most common one is on. All right, so I asked you to create this corpus, and there were I want to highlight a couple of interesting comments that you guys made. One person said, it is a really great tool in my study area, molecular biology, homologous gene expression. There was no surprise in the most common words: expression, protein, gene, membrane. Yeah, very obvious. And the contextualization and the correct application in a sentence is helpful. Besides that, it will help me to search for and find some specific results using keywords. So I found this to be interesting because the person realized, okay, yeah, the words are obvious. There's no surprise in the words that I found: protein, gene, membrane. But the contextualization is useful. But also, a lot of people mention this, it's also useful for me to find some keywords. I have all these PDFs in my area, and I can actually find where these things occur in my corpus, so it's helpful that way. Similarly, another comment in the same vein, about the program Conc. It is really simple to work with, very intuitive. I also discovered that Conc can be a powerful tool for writing a paper since you can analyze how words and expressions are used in a sentence. If you have doubts about what context and what prepositions you should be using, you can easily check on Conc. The program can also be used as a library where you can find something specific that maybe you can't remember in which article it is. So speaking of articles, you remember this map here. This is the real, our world, and this is the publishing world, with the countries showing inflated size according to their publication production. So here you have what could be typically considered as the global north, as very strong in production. And you also see that some countries where English is the predominant language, like the UK, like the United States and Canada, are maybe overrepresented on this map. Now, some models of English reflect this as well, where this global north, especially the English-speaking part of it, can be considered the English center. So United States and Canada can be considered an English center country. This is where English is supposed to be the sun of the English galaxy. The United States is, one of the, like the UK, we're supposed to be the owners of English. That's the inner circle. And then you have countries that have been colonized by Britain, for example, such as India, such as Hong Kong, Singapore, where the English there is a kind of native language, is something that is an important language, but is not considered the center, not the inner circle of this of nativeness. And then you have what's called the expanding circle, which is like Brazil. Brazil is part of the expanding circle of English speakers, where English is not an official language here. English is not the native language here, but it's one of expanding importance. So here's the model. This is Katru conceived this model. It's very debatable. There's a lot of debate around this model. But what has not been discussed a lot, and you read this in the article I asked you to read for today, is to what extent the people here writing in China, writing in Brazil, writing in Japan, how much they may be affecting the English that is produced in academia in the inner circle. And this is important for you to be aware of. Why? Because when you go to write your papers, what is considered correct or not now is changing, it's evolving. And so there's an important point to be made, I believe, here regarding the extent to which you have to worry about, does your English sound like a native speaker English, and what is that anyway? These people here, they use English with each other as a lingua franca. So when Germans speak to Japanese, and then Japanese speak to people from Israel, they will use English in international events. You've seen this happen many times. And this is their lingua franca. This use of English is actually more common than English that is used among native speakers now. And this has been the case for a long time, but now it's becoming, there's more awareness how this is also the case now for publication in English. And so to the extent where you have experts in English as lingua franca saying that writing for academic publishing is in effect now writing in English as a lingua franca. And this was something that was kind of theoretical until about a year ago. I started investigating this. And so I wanted to just kind of quickly go over the research that you looked at in the article. Evidencias, of changes in concepts or prejudices or beliefs about what is correct English. We'll start with the word evidences. Evidencias, I don't know if you know this, but evidencias in English is evidence. There's no plural form of evidence. So you shouldn't say evidences, at least in my opinion. And also not just my opinion, but if you look at different dictionaries, they'll say the same thing. So Macmillan will say it's uncountable. You can't say evidences, 2 evidences, 3 evidences. Same thing with Cambridge Dictionary, Collins. They all say the same thing. Evidence is a non-count noun. And so I question this, and because I, as a director of CAPA, this is my research area, looking into articles from non-native speakers, I see that they write the word evidences many times in different areas, and yet it gets published. So I wanted to look at this. To what extent is there ELF, or English as a lingua franca, from non-native speakers in international journals? And I call it especially in the last years because the word here should be especially, meaning particularly, but it's a common mistake to confuse those. And I've seen it in the data many times. And in the last years instead of recent years, and to me, I've seen this in articles as well that have been published and that have come across my desk, instead of saying in recent years. But yet you see these kinds of construction published. And so I thought, okay, is there evidence of non-native linguistic forms in articles published in international English medium journals? If so, how generalizable is it? Just in Brazilian journals? Just in small journals? In what journals does it appear? And is there a trend apparent? Is this something that is growing? I wanted to look at those three things. So I looked at food science. I had this corpus that I've shown you before of food science journals. I looked at a couple different periods to see if there was a trend of growth. And I looked at articles that were written exclusively by native speakers, according to their address of institutional affiliation, and articles that were written by non-native speakers, all in the same area of science, the same field. All right? And so the journals were all from big publishers, Wiley, Elsevier, Blackwell, and most of them in inner circle countries. So United States, United Kingdom, and then the Netherlands, where English is obviously really important. That's where Elsevier is.
Professor, a chamada está no ar, tá? Então podem ir lá responder a chamada 1. E para o remoto a palavra passe é grammar. Thanks.
Can I go? All right. And so these were the native speaker countries. These were the inner circle countries that you see here. Ones all familiar to you. And from the non-native speaker, this is called the EAL, the EAL research article, English as a Additional Language research article, countries. You have several ones. Spain dominating the list, followed by Italy, and so on. Brazil is there as well. And so I'll show you a few of the findings. And so the findings are words that are significantly more commonly used by non-native speakers compared to native speakers. So you have, for example, the word researches. It's really common for Brazilians because, and not just Brazilians, as you'll see, to write the word researches because you think of pesquisas. That's a countable word in Portuguese. But if you go to the Collins Dictionary, if you go to the Macmillan Dictionary, if you go to the Oxford Dictionary, the Cambridge Dictionary, they say you shouldn't say this. And yet, what you see is that it's attested in the non-native corpus of published research articles in big journals. And you see this is attested. It shows up in different countries, Spain, Brazil, China, and Serbia as a use, and in American journals, British journals, and Elsevier, the Dutch journal. Another word, prove. So you have in the native article, the native author corpus, you have two, one is repeated, it's from the same article, two different articles in which this occurs, this construction, and prove that. And the non-native author corpus, 15, is significantly more common. This LL stands for log likelihood statistic to measure significant difference in corpus linguistics. And so you see here lots of examples from different countries, Spain, Greece, China, Italy, Taiwan, Colombia, and only native speaker journals publishing this. And it's interesting, there are different explanations about why this might be, why it might be that non-natives say prove that and natives don't. One might be that in Portuguese, for example, it might be okay to say, esses dados comprovam que, but for some reason, for native speakers, they feel less confident in using that. And we'll talk more about that when we talk about the discussion section later on in this course. Then you have another word that was significantly more common in the non-native corpus, nowadays. I guess this is something maybe that is borrowed from certain languages. I don't know, maybe atualmente would be an example in Portuguese. And so this is not something that native speakers use in their corpus, but non-natives do, often in their writing. The same thing with works. So you had 10 hits in the native author corpus, so it does exist. However, you have 60 hits in the non-native corpus. So it's very common for people to talk about previous works and future works. And I guess because in Portuguese, as an example, you can say outros trabalhos. So when you talk about trabalhos, you mean other studies, other papers. You can say the same thing in Spanish, trabajos. But it's not so common, not so common at all in the native speaker corpus. And you see that it occurs in all the journals that were looked at and a number of countries. Another one, the word besides. Non-native speakers use this word quite often, whereas native speakers don't. And it's used in this way. Besides, as an initial sentence, initial discourse marker. Besides, blah, blah, blah. I think this is kind of like in Portuguese, you say além disso. This is kind of like the besides thing. However, native speakers, when you look at how they use the same thing, they don't use besides, they use words like moreover and in addition. And another one that was quite common, a phrase, not just a word, in this context, you have a significantly higher number of non-native speakers writing in this context, which I think is something that you say in Portuguese as well, nesse contexto, nesse contexto. Same thing in Spanish, but you wouldn't, native speakers, I should say, don't use it this way. They use other things like thus, therefore, and the same thing with it is well known that, which I think is kind of, sounds funny to me, but it's something that non-native speakers use more. And the point of all this is that what you see here is that with all of those items, you indeed do see a growth, a significant growth. When you look at chi-square, you see a significant growth within all of these items. So what does that mean? That means basically it's evidence that these items which were once not included in research production by non-native speakers now are included much more in their articles that are published. So there are maybe different explanations for why that might be. It might be that because there are more non-native speakers who are publishing in English, and there's constant growth, as we saw in the first week, you see now there are actually more non-native speakers as first authors in top journals than there are native speakers. Therefore, the ones who are reviewing, the ones who are the peer reviewers of papers are also often now non-native speakers. Maybe they don't really care so much. Whatever the case may be, the point is that what is correct is not not the same as it was 10, 15, 20 years ago. Moreover, this can also be seen as evidence that what the reviewers care about most might be not so much language, as we've said before, not grammar or prepositions and stuff, but actually what's the research story that you're telling? Do you have research that's worth it? And is it being told in a way that is well delivered? And so I presented all this evidence, or all these evidences, not to show you, oh, this is what native speakers say, and this is what non-native speakers say, so don't do that. No. I mean, if you want to say what native speakers say, that's fine, that's your choice. But to show you that this is wrong to say it this way, but that there's evidence that this is something that's becoming more and more prevalent. And so this does show, you do see that the expanding circle is influencing English as a lingua franca in academic discourse. So when you come to sit down and write, remember that your research story will likely matter more than a few odd mistakes you might make. So when you go to use Google Scholar, when you go to use DeepL, when you go to use NConc and all that, even if you escape Grammarly, even if a few little mistakes escape you, if your research is good, if it's good research, important research, and you know how to deliver it in a way, and you argue for it in such a way that is convincing, then it won't matter if you say based in so much as the story that you're telling. So let's move now to writing and planning your writing. So here you are in your lab, and you have found some interesting research results, and then you're going to sit down and you're write about it, right? But how do you get from here to here? Well, it's not like you check the results and then you go straight to your computer, right? That's not what happens usually. There's a whole process that goes on before that. It's a whole complexity, but nobody talks about this process, or it's not talked about as much as it should. There's a lot of this that goes on. And so for the next section of the class, I want to talk about this. What is this that goes on that nobody really talks about? The stuff that goes on here and not here. We see the product, we see what has happened after you've typed those words, but not a lot of people know what happens up here. So to illustrate this point, I'm going to invite Laura Binder, who is the teaching assistant here for this class, to come up on stage. All right. So you can stay right there. Yeah. Okay. So imagine that Laura is a graduate student in endocrinology. And she has just found some very interesting results, and she has stuff that she's excited about writing. She has never published before, and she's going to try to start writing an article in English. So I'm going to be the voice in Laura's head. Okay? Okay. Let's open up the computer. Hit the on button here. Okay, I'm excited because I've got some really interesting results, and I think it's going to be a big hit in the research world. Yes. Oh, why is this computer so slow? Okay. Did I feed the cat today? I don't remember if I fed the cat today. Okay. Okay, here's my data set. Okay, yeah, these are the data I have to write about. Now, the journal that I'm writing for says that my article can't be more than 5,000 words. All right, so today I'm going to sit down and write 5,000 words. That's it. I'm going to do it. Got the coffee. I'm all ready to go. Oh, okay. Let's open up the Word document here. All right. Here is the blank page in front of me. Must get past the cursor. All right. Let's see. Let's start with the title. Okay, start with the title. Right. So the title in Portuguese would be something like As novas terapias para o tratamento de diabetes tipo 2. Ok. As novas terapias para o tratamento de diabetes tipo 2. Okay, in English, that would be the new therapy. Wait a minute. Do I have to put the or just new therapies? Is it the new therapies or just new therapies? Let me send a message to Ron. He might know. All right. So, Ron, do you know if it should be the new therapy or just new therapies? What sounds better to you? Send. Oh, he hasn't read it yet. How am I gonna? Okay. Well, somebody's trying to friend me on Facebook. Who is this? Oh my gosh, it's my ex from 5,000 years ago. What does he want with me? Okay, no, I'll just ignore that. Okay, let's go back to the title here. All right. So next I'm going to, where was I? Oh, yeah, the title. Okay, so I'm just gonna not write the, and I'll write new novas terapias. I'll write new therapies. New. Oh no, but wait a minute. New. If I write new, okay, it's new now, but next year it won't be so new, and then 2025 it'll be old. So I'm already dating my paper before I publish it. If I write new therapies, so what do I do? Recent therapies? No, same problem. Recent. Let me look in the dictionary and see if I can find any synonyms for new. Okay. No. Emerging. Is it emerging or emergent? Let me ask Ron. Ron, another question. Here is a question that I have about emerging and emergent. Which one sounds better to you? Send. What is he doing? Okay. All right, let's get back to the title. So let's say that new, no, not new. We'll say, okay, forget new, forget the. We'll just do therapies. Okay, just start with therapies. Terapias, therapies. But wait a minute, therapy could be psychological things, right? You're getting psychotherapy. I wonder if that's something that Americans will think could mean different things. Oh, great, my coffee is cold. All right, now I'm gonna go get some more coffee, and actually I have to water the plants too. All right, I'll come back to this. I will, I'll come back to this. Now, let's see, how many words have I written? I'll be back. And you can see that in that kind of situation, obviously it's an exaggeration, but when someone sits down to a blank piece of paper, there's a lot that's going on in their heads. And it has to do with the effect they want to cause in the reader, how the precise words that they want to use will sound to the reader, the intended reader. But that presumes a couple of things. First of all, you've thought about who that intended reader is. Second of all, that you are able to decide which words to use. So you can imagine that if deciding what words to use is difficult for a native speaker of English, for a non-native speaker of English, it's even that much harder. And in addition, besides all of that, you have potential issues with somebody who is a new scholar, somebody who has never published before, wondering, okay, they're doubting themselves a lot more than they would if they've already published 3 or 4 or 500 articles before, where they have a history of success, and say, yeah, don't worry about it, don't freak out about it, just get the stuff on paper. So it's that transition between, that transition between this and this is not that easy. Where you have, and you might be excited about getting the word out there about your research. You might be excited about the results that you have to tell the world, but then when you get to actually sitting down to writing the thing, it can be a challenge. And it's exactly what Laura illustrated there. You might get up to go to the bathroom and think about it some more, and it's not like you just sit down and write it. And you go, I'll go make some coffee, and then you sit down and write some more. Think about it some more, go to the bathroom again, because you made so much coffee, then wash the dishes, then go back to it, and it's a long slog. But people don't often talk about this slog. So what do authors think about when they plan their writing? What is it that goes through their heads? Well, one of the things is, who is my reader? The answer to this question is not just one reader. The answer to this question could be, for example, you might be imagining your orientador as a reader of the article that you're writing. You might be thinking about a member of your banca for your doctoral thesis or your master's dissertation. You might be imagining somebody who's really well known in the field, somebody you would like to sit down and have coffee with to tell your research to, or a laboratory, a group of people that you would like to tell your research to, and you can imagine them reading your work, because, okay, if you can do that, that's a good thing, because what will happen then? The stakes are increased. The stakes, I mean, the risk, what you'll lose if you don't succeed, those stakes are raised. And that means that you'll try to put extra effort into saying your words carefully. And that's a good thing. So you can imagine, if you're thinking of, oh, Dr. So-and-so in Germany, who you really want, you imagine that person you hope that person reads your paper. What would Dr. So-and-so say about this? How can I show Dr. So-and-so that this research is important and contributes to the field and advances the field? Not just generally, you're not writing to a blank screen on a Word document. You're writing to a particular, what some people call a reader in the text that you're thinking about. And if you can do that, if you can think about who the reader is, that will also help you decide what journal you want to publish in. So who do I imagine are the readers of this? Who's my audience? Who am I talking to? Who do I hope reads this? And often the answer to that question is the same people that you've been reading for your own research, the people that appear in your reference section, people that appear in your bibliography. Those are the people that you hope, those are the journals that you usually hope to publish in. Another important question that people think about before they start writing is, okay, so this research, what is my unique selling point? What's my USP? What makes my research special in terms of why will people want to buy it? I love the expression in Portuguese, vender seu peixe. Yeah. How am I going to vender meu peixe? You know, why are people going to buy this fish? What is the unique selling point of this? In order to answer that question, you have to think about what everybody else has already done. And not just think about it, you're going to have to put it down on the piece of paper. And what points might threaten this research? This is a common misconception that more or less experienced researchers have, that I can't talk about my defects, I can't think about my defects because my research is perfect. Kind of like the way we think about our own children. Oh, my son there's no defect. No, don't talk bad about my son because he's perfect. Well, yeah, everybody has, some defect. Every study has a defect, and your awareness of it is very important because that way you can anticipate problems or questions that reader might ask when they're reading your article, and also you can in the discussion section, as you'll see later in this course, include these as okay. We are aware of these. We're aware of these possible defects, or not defects, but problems in the research that should be addressed for future research. And then the other thing is how the article fits into your story. So when authors sit down and think about, they think about not only about the journal they're going to publish in, the story they want to tell, but they also think about, okay, how does this article contribute to my development as a researcher? They start thinking about their laches. And think, okay, what do I want this article to do for me? When someone goes to look at my curriculum, my CV, what is this? How does this article look to them? How does this fit into the rest of my research story? And so therefore, what do I hope to achieve with this research? Do I want to only talk to a particular audience, or do I want a very broad audience to read this? Do I want this to be a defining research piece for me, or do I want this to be something that is a step to another bigger research project that will attract funding, for example? All of this stuff, all these questions might happen before you write, and probably even happen while you're writing. So at the moment, we've talked about things that happen, as Laura illustrated, things that happen before you write, but there's a video that I posted online that show you that actually while you're writing, these questions come up too. So you had Lev talking about writing an email. This video is, if you haven't watched it already, it's on my website. And in the video, which was created in the 1990s, you have Lev talking to a woman he met at a bar the night before. This is back in the day before WhatsApp, so you might think it's strange that someone would invite somebody out on a date through an email, but people used to do that in the 1990s. And so, so here's Lev, and he's writing this email to Mimi, this woman that he read at a bar, and then you can hear in the email him talking to himself. He's having this dialogue with himself, and he's like, okay, hello, hi from Lev. And I'm not say hi, say hello. Dear Mimi, no, not dear Mimi. I'm gonna change this to hello Mimi, or hi Mimi, or even better, more casual, hey Mimi. And he talks about, it was nice to meet you. Will you go out with me? No, that sounds too needy. You gotta change it to, it was nice meeting you, and it's a shame you left too early because there's this drunk girl who tried to hit on me, and it was a great time. You missed it. And all of this, the silly story, is on. I put this on the website to illustrate one thing, which is that there's a lot more that goes on not just the fingers on the keyboard. There's a lot that's going on here while the person's writing. And that what's going on up here is thinking, what effect do I want to have on the reader? How are these words going to achieve the maximum effect that I want them to achieve in the reader? And this effect is impacted by how important you think the work is. So obviously, if you're sending a WhatsApp message to a friend about, hey, have you watched Stranger Things? It's not going to be a big deal. You're not going to care so much about how you word it. But when it's something like an article that will be read by a wide audience that you care about, then this is what comes into play. You start thinking, okay, how are my words going to be interpreted? And you're going to have in mind this guy right here, the naysayer. And you're going to see this guy a few more times during this course. Who's the naysayer? A naysayer is somebody who is doubting or questioning all the time things that you're doing or saying. And in the academic world, the naysayer is ubiquitous. You see him everywhere. And the people who receive your article, who have to decide whether your article is to be published or not, that person is most likely a naysayer. When they receive your article, they're not your friend. They don't love your work. They don't immediately say, oh, I love this guy's work, I want to publish it. No, they're going to look at your article and say, I wonder if this person has included all of the right references here. Why hasn't she or he included this reference here? Or why did she or he decide to do the experiment this way and not that way? This is the naysayer. And that naysayer, he's going to be present in all the sections of your article. The introduction and the method and the result and the discussion section. And so we're going to talk about how can we please the naysayer? How can we make sure that he's going to start reading your article like this, with his arms folded like this. How can we get him to lower those arms a little bit? Now, let me ask you, and you don't have to answer, but you can think about it if you want, and the same thing with the people who are watching this remotely. In these sections, imagine Laura, when she was sitting up here, she started with the title, and already that was a block for her, starting with the title. She didn't get past the title. If you were to start with one of these sections here, which section would you start with? Conclusion? Probably not. Well, there's no correct answer to this, but some people suggest that you start with your results section. You start with the data that you have. Think about why that might be useful. Why might it be useful to start with your results, your data? And it has to do with the story that you're going to tell. It's so common for when I take on master's degree students or doctoral students, they often come with this project that they have in mind, with a priori assumptions about what's going to happen with the research. And they often say things like, I want to prove that blah, blah, blah. There's a problem, there's some kind of issue that they have identified, great, and they say, and I want my project, my master's thesis, my doctoral dissertation is going to show the world that it's not true, or it's going to show the world that this is the case. But in fact, what is recommended, and this is something I took from Joshua Schimmel's book, Writing Science, is that you should start with your data because, first of all, as he says, the story that you tell grows organically from the data. Moreover, this. This is when problems can begin to happen. When the person already knows the story that she or he wants to tell before they start writing, before they even start to conduct the data collection. They're already thinking, this is the story I'm going to tell. Instead of saying, what is the story that my data are telling me? What is the story that the data are telling? And then you as an author, you are the interpreter of that. And so they recommend, is one of the strategies they recommend, is you start with the results section in this IMRAD structure. And the results section then is not something you write necessarily, you can write it, but think about what are the results that you have or the data that you want to show, and these data, this result, can then guide what you say in the introduction section. Remember, I said in the first class that the introduction section is something that we focus on a lot in this class because it is your greeting card. It is the first thing that the reader is going to read in most cases. They're going to look at your introduction, and if that's already bad or confusing, that sets the tone for the rest of the article. By the same token, if the introduction section is clear and has the elements that are expected, then that can save you for future reading or as the reviewer goes through the article. It can strengthen your case. So this structure here about IMRAD, of course, we've talked about this before, is in all a lot of research article structures. So here you have the article that you read that I published last year, and you have introduction method with 2 sections, and we'll talk about why I did it this way in a couple of weeks, and then the results. But I didn't start with the introduction. I started with, okay, what are my data? What's happening here, and what do they have to show, and what are they not saying? This introduction section is crucial for a number of reasons, one of which is it contextualizes your study. It first says, okay, this is why I'm talking about what I'm talking about. This is what's they say. In academic discourse, writers and people who deliver presentations about research, they talk about what they say before they talk about what I say. That's a common structure in academic discourse. They say versus what I say, or they say and I say. This is what Graf and Birkenstein, they have a whole book about this, basically, this structure in academic argumentation. And they say, first of all, a writer needs to indicate not only what his or her thesis is, but also what the larger conversation that thesis is responding to. And when it comes to constructing an argument, remember that you are entering a conversation and therefore need to start with what others are saying. So you should think about, okay, what is the conversation that I want to contribute to? That conversation is all the research that you're citing. When you write your dissertation, when you write your thesis, those people that you're citing, that's the conversation that you're in. That's your conversation. And you, when you write, you have to say, okay, this is the conversation, and here is my contribution to that conversation. My father, he is a good example from another context. His first job was as a door-to-door vacuum cleaner salesman. So in the 1960s, it was common in the United States for people to go from house to house, door to door, and ring the doorbell and sell vacuums, among other things. You had door-to-door salesmen. And he says that when he did this, the company gave him a special vacuum that had its tube there was transparent. And that was important because one of the strategies, one of the sales techniques that he was instructed to use was to say, let me demonstrate the effectiveness of this vacuum cleaner. And then the company would suggest that you offer to not only vacuum the carpet, but actually vacuum the bed sheets. So he'd say, please, can I go to your bedroom and vacuum the sheets of your bed? Do you know why? Because almost all the time, maybe it wouldn't be the same here in Brazil, maybe Americans are dirtier, I don't know. You go to the person's bed sheet, and then the person would see all of the dead skin and sebum or whatever coming up through that transparent pipe, and it would just be like, oh my God, I didn't realize that was so dirty. They'd be so embarrassed that they'd want to buy the thing. But the point is that that device, the way it was constructed, to see that dirt, helped show the potential customer in a very transparent way how problematic it was, showed how much of a problem it was. Without that, the person wouldn't see. They would just see, they'd hear noise. Of course, you could maybe show the dirt afterwards, which probably did anyway. But in that vacuuming, they could actually see how problematic it was, and making that problem very evident strengthened the case to sell the vacuum cleaner. So in the research world, in essence, the stronger you can build a case that there is a problem or a lack of something, then the more likely the person, the reader, is going to want to hear what your contribution is, how you're going to solve it, or how you solved it, or what you have to say about it. And that comes from the results section back to the introduction section. And you do that thinking that the person, just like the customer buying the vacuum cleaner, isn't going to naturally just give you the money, is going to think about why. What is the strength here? What is new here? And once again, you can think about this entire structure, but focus on, right, what is the way I'm going to sell this spaceship? You can see it happen already in the abstract. So here you have typical abstract from the article that you read. While the number of research articles written by non-native speakers of English and published in English medium international journals is on the rise, little is known about the extent to which that trend may be affecting the way in which English is used in that genre. And there's one key phrase here. There's one key phrase that the reader, someone who is evaluating this text, will say, aha, here's what the person wants to get to. This is showing that there is a need. We don't know enough about this. So this part here of the abstract, while the number of research articles written by non-native speakers of English and published in English medium journals is on the rise, that's showing what's called the territory. That's the conversation we already know. People already know about this. Boring, don't need to talk about that anymore. We know this already. You can think of it as a kind of crowded train car. Not much needs to be said about this anymore because that's been there, done that. We know this already. So we want to know what's new. So then there's a key phrase, little is known about the extent to which that trend may be affecting the way in which English is used in that genre. Okay, so in that crowded train car, then I'm trying to make space. Here's me. In that conversation, here's my voice now. We already know this. Now that's the they say. Now let's talk about what I say. They say and I say. So this has been analyzed several times over a number of decades now. How do researchers make this point? How do they show that they are making a contribution? And it's basically this. Researchers, in that conversation, they make a space. They create a space. They call this a research space. Create a research space. Create a research space, C-A-R-S, that's cars. And this happens in the introduction. And if you analyze 100 articles, you're going to find that this happens 90 times. Not all of them, but it's a very common structure. And this happens here. You have the territory, and then you have this space that is being made for the research that I want to talk about. This are also called moves. So this is move 1 here. And then the reddish part here is move 2. And then finally, there's the last sentence. Okay, so this is what was done about it. Talking about the study itself, and that's your move 3. Move 1, establishing territory. Number 2, establishing your space or your niche, nishu. And 3, how you occupy that niche. That's cars. I'll let you read that there. So that territory is kind of like the vacuum cleaner. where you show this is important, this is a problem. So here's a solution, the vacuum cleaner. You don't have this thing that sucks up more than anything else, so you need to have this thing, and this will solve your problem. Moves 1, 2, and 3. So let's look at a practical example from another field, not my own. For example, experimental social psychology. Here you have a title, "The more you play, the more aggressive you become. A long-term experimental study of cumulative violent video game effects on hostile expectations and aggressive behavior." It seems like every other year there's some study about trying to link video games to violent behavior. So if you look at the abstract here, they say, "It is well established that violent video games increase aggression. There is a stronger evidence of short-term violent video game effects than long-term effects. The present experiment tests." Can you see where move 1, move 2, and move 3 are there? So that conversation, the crowded train car, that's the territory that's here. It is well established that violent video games increase aggression. We know that. No need to talk about this anymore. It's well established. You can just imagine that in the introduction you have like a string of citations here. And then there is a stronger evidence of short-term video game effects than longer-term effects. So we need more research on the longer-term effects. There's the gap. And there's your 1, 2, and 3. Do you remember the abstract we looked at last week when we analyzed in the grammar? The realizou-se uma pesquisa exploratória de campo. Well, let's look at that again and look to see if we can see the same pattern. So here you have realizou-se uma pesquisa exploratória de campo com o objetivo de analisar as ações de saúde desenvolvidas. Well, you speak Portuguese better than me. You can read that. You can remember this is from last week. If you think about this framework here, the CARS framework, a territory, niche, and establishing niche and occupying niche, can you find the first move? Just the first move in the abstract. Let's go ahead and see if you can find it. Were you able to identify the conversation that they're trying to enter into? Were you able to see that territory, that crowded train car? In other words, the reason why they're doing the research? I personally could not find it. How about move 2? The niche, finding out where the gap is. Well, if you don't have a move 1, it's difficult to have it. You can have it, but it's not so common to have a move 2. What I see here is actually all of this here is basically one big move 3. Here's what we did. It's almost as if somebody just gave you like a plate of spaghetti and didn't ask what you wanted, or if you were hungry, just say, "Hey, here's a big plate of spaghetti. Eat it." So this notion of they say, the conversations you want to be a part of, and I say, is actually a very powerful driver of academic discourse, the way people write. And it's part of what good academic writers often do, they often think of when they sit down to write. So when Laura was here thinking about, okay, what's my title? Really what she should have been thinking about as well is, okay, what is, and this will help you hopefully in the future when you sit down to write, what is the conversation that I want to be a part of? What does the they say? So I can get to what I say. And this is a powerful driver of how you can structure an introduction. That can set you on the right path in an article. Now, what happens in other countries is interesting. So in Brazil, in the Brazilian context, a researcher named Eliana Irano, and I asked you to read this article for today, she wanted to see, okay, do Brazilians do this in a different way? Do they do something for Brazilian journals that is different from what is done in international journals? And so she looked at research article introductions in English for specific purposes, a comparison between Brazilian Portuguese and English. And here are her findings. She says, the findings from the analysis of Brazilian introductions using the CARS model show significant deviation. To start with, 7 out of the 10 Brazilian introductions do not contain a move to, i.e. they do not establish a niche. 3 of the introductions contain a single move, like we just saw, a 3. BSP1, the journal that they looked at, only contains, or the article only contains move 1, whereas BSP3 only contains a move 3. None of them follow a strict M1, move 1, move 2, move 3 sequence. The only sequence that is repeated is M1, M3, which occurs 4 times. And so you have, instead of 1, 2, 3, what you see is something more like this. A 1 and a 1 and a 3. So that's establishing territory only, or establishing territory and occupying a niche even though you haven't talked about the niche, or just talking about occupying the niche, and so on. Compared that to the international journals in the same field, and what you see is this. And there you can see it's actually rare for move 2 to not occur. 2 is almost in all of the articles analyzed, sometimes many times. This is what's missing, territory, and here's the gap. This is what people are saying, conversation, and here's the gap, and so on. And then moving to move 3. The point is, move 2 is there. I'll let you imagine why that is. You can speculate. Why do Brazilians, according to this study anyway, why do Brazilians not include a move 2 in their research? I don't know. Maybe it's because it's not a common practice in Brazilian research, but there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not saying that this is the correct way. It may be that Brazilians feel like, oh, why am I going to point out a deficiency in that conversation when I'm talking about something that comes from Brazil? Maybe they feel a self-esteem issue. I don't know. This is all speculation, just a wild guess. I have no idea. We could debate about this over coffee sometime if you like. But the point is that if you want to play the publishing game, the international publication game, you should include a move 2. So the purpose of me showing you this is, for one, to show you, as Brazilians, you might want to be aware that Brazilians tend to not include a move 2. And this lack of a move 2 could negatively impact your international publication. Because to play the international publication game, you should include a move 2 in your introduction. And you see it everywhere. So when I mentioned this in the first class, when I look at the rating criteria, when I receive a manuscript to judge whether it should be published or not, this one from TESOL Quarterly, the very first thing they ask is, does the manuscript contain new and significant information to justify publication? And this is linked to this. Is the problem significantly concisely stated? This occurs, all of this, at the very beginning of the article, in your introduction. That's why we talk so much about the introduction in this class to start, because it's so important. Imagine you, as a reader, if you don't know why the person is writing or what the person is talking about exactly, it can be very frustrating. And it's especially problematic if you're a doctoral student or a master's student, but especially a doctoral student, you spend 4 years, or sometimes more, working on the same research, in your head it's clear why you're doing it. You've done it, you've eaten, breathed, and slept your research. You know why you're doing your research. You don't have to convince yourself about it anymore. But it might not be so clear to the person reading your research for the very first time. And so you have to be aware that in the introduction section, that's where that happens.
Professor?
Yeah.
Can I make a question?
Yeah.
So you show an example that had only the move 3, right? How would you answer this questionnario? Consider that introduction.
These are criteria. These criteria, and how would I answer this? For what?
For the example that had only the move 3. So the article has new information to justify publication.
That was just the abstract. I didn't show you the whole article. Maybe I would find. Oh, so here it is. Finally, this is the reason that the person is writing the article. Or more likely, I would say no. I would say I don't see the new information here because I don't know what the conversation is. You don't want to make the reviewer of your manuscript have to work for that.
Okay.
It's not like, you have to imagine the reviewer is somebody who has 3 kids, a dog and a cat, and wants to watch the new Game of Thrones or something. And they don't want to have to spend their whole night trying to figure out what your message is on your manuscript. They don't really have that much goodwill to do that. So the easier, the clearer that you can make the significant problem concisely stated, the clearer you can make that, the better. So it should be like, okay, here's the conversation. Here's the contribution here. This is why they did the research. Okay, now I'll read the rest. And I'll find out if the method is good. I'll find out if the results make sense, if the person discusses it. But you have to get them on the right track with the introduction first. Make it clear, why are they doing this? Okay, here it is. This is why this research is here.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. So, did you have another question, or that was it? Okay. Yeah. So my message overall today is, first of all, even though I focused on last class on look at how you can correct your own grammar. First of all, yes, the grammar is important. It's very important to get the grammar right, and now you have some tools to help yourselves. But actually, you can see that there is evidence that in the research world, what reviewers care about more actually than if you have the right preposition or not, is how good the research is. There's evidence that despite non-native forms in writing, that research gets published if they think that the research is worth publishing. So that's one thing. The other thing that's important is that when you sit down to write, it's not just about sitting down and putting your fingers on the keyboard, but thinking about, okay, so what is the message that I want to deliver here? And that message depends on a lot of things. It's going to depend on who do you want to read your article? How do you want to sound? What's the conversation you want to get into that you may be a part of? But it should also be structured, and this can help you when you write, thinking of, okay, so they say and I say. Let me talk about the they say, that's move 1, before I move into the I say. So how you structure the message you want to deliver in the introduction, how you justify your research, and how you steer your research in the introduction should be structured with at least a move 2. You should think about the importance of move 2. But that's not necessarily where you start. You start, first of all, thinking about, okay, what are my data telling me? And how can these data be a part of this conversation? And if you can do that, then you can get past, okay, I don't know what to say here. Should I write the new therapies or new therapies? Because then you're not thinking about little tiny details, but thinking about the bigger picture. thinking about these moves and thinking about how you can make a contribution to the research, not just in the introduction, whole picture that you want to have. Because as I said before, and it's illustrated through that video with Lev, he's having a dialogue with himself as he's writing to Mimi. But that dialogue is driven by not only his results, because he doesn't have results, but he's driven by what the result that he wants to have. And so if you have that in mind when you're writing, not just the title or how to structure it, but the whole story here, that can help you a lot. Which is why I suggested in the first class that you should try to write English if you think that you want to practice your English. I highly recommend that. Also, as I mentioned, there's evidence that if you work with international partners, that can strengthen your research impact. But if writing in English means that you're going to worry too much about the word "the," then that can negatively impact how you keep an eye on this entire story here. For while you're writing the introduction, you should also be thinking about how you're going to lead to the results and how you're going to discuss those results, and always keeping in mind this guy right here. And you're going to see this guy come up again and again in this course. There's no such thing as research that's perfect. All right, so now I want you to practice this. So on formative, let me get down to oops. I'm going to have you look at just the introduction section of an article. This is very short. It's a very short introduction section to identify where there's, if you hear a naysayer, and also pay attention to his structure, moves 1, 2, and 3. We'll look at that next week. And then on Module 3, on Go Formative, I'm going to ask you to think about, in your research, what is the conversation that you want to be a part of, and what is your move to? Now, one of the exercises there is to try to create a summary of a research presentation that you would give at an international conference. Some of you don't have data collected yet. Some of you, not common, but some people don't have data collected. If you don't have data collected yet, just try to imagine you justifying the research even at the earliest stages in that exercise. And that's it. As was mentioned, this is due on Tuesday at 23:59 at night. At 23:59 and 59 seconds, if it's not there, then you fail the course. No, just
That's
kidding.
precision, right?
That's precision, yeah. That's not Greenwich Mean Time, that's Curitiba time. All right. Thanks, everybody. See you next week.
See you next week.
Oh, we have about 5 minutes for questions, right?
Yeah? Alguma pergunta? Não? Sim? Então, é isso. That's a wrap, people.
That's a wrap.